Hello, BookTube. Well, it's Friday, and that heralds the weekend. And it's usually around this time that a whole bunch of booktubers will make progress report videos of one kind or another, Friday reads or Friday check-ins, weekend reads, that sort of thing, uh, to look back on what they've read and take stock of what they're reading now and look forward to what they are reading. Everybody takes a different kind of spin on it, and I watch a lot of them. I find them oddly more satisfying than almost any other kind of regular booktube staple, because they coincide with the conversations that I would have with you in person. I would want to know about your reading in exactly this kind of way. So I have a video like that for today. It's an unusual one in that it is all analog. I have a stack of books. Uh, I've been doing a lot of e-reading as well. I sign up for those daily ebook deals, and I take everything that's free. I don't take anything that isn't free, and neither should you. 99 cents might seem like a great deal for an ebook, especially if it's something that more or less kind of sort of vaguely you might have wanted. But 299 cents in a month is no longer a good deal. So just make a mental rule that you will not get anything, that you will not spend any money on those sites, and then they will do you no harm. I have found that in those daily deal email blasts that I get, sometimes, very rarely, there will be a notice for a 99 or a $1.99 book that does look interesting. And always, every single time when I do that, it's available on Kindle Unlimited, which is also free. A service that the Amazon ecosystem does, where you can have a rotating electronic library of titles out under your name. And you are limited not by how long you have them, but by how many you have. It is exactly the model that libraries should adapt. And it works just fine for me. I get a huge amount of use out of Kindle Unlimited. And always, those slightly more attractive titles are on Kindle Unlimited. So maybe check that out, but absolutely don't pay anything. And I since that amounts to a lot of reading, and since there's less competing with that reading, I do a lot of that. But I thought for the fun of it, we would do an all analog, especially since a lot of my reading in the last week was analog, reading and rereading. So we can start with this. I just got this in the mail from one of you. This is First Claim by Luke Short. It's a Western. This is a modern reprint, but this thing came out in 1960. And okay, I'm looking at the cover now and wondering if I know the artist. Well, anyway, it is extremely standard. This is an extremely standard Western, right down to the very annoying detail of place name that is meant to carry dramatic weight. A side note to authors, I think I was saying this in 1960, but I'll say it again in 2024. Don't do that. Don't do that with your character names or with place names. I don't want to read a story set in a town called Harmony. I don't want to do it. I know exactly the heavy hand you're putting on the meat scale, and I don't like it. But it's a story about a guy who rides all dusty and dirty from the road into a little cattle town, and he's got a score to settle with the man who owns the town. He owns the town, he owns the businesses, he owns the sheriff, he owns everything. And the only ally that he has is a feisty young woman. One of you sent this to me in a big, wonderful Christmas care package. But when you sent it, when the person who sent it, when they included it in the box, they knew perfectly well that it was a long shot, and it was. And it wasn't good. It wasn't bad. I mean, it wasn't. I've read Westerns for June on the Range that were bad. This wasn't bad, but it wasn't anything special at all. Then let's see here. What else can we do? This thing. I've had a joy revisiting this. I think that in the new year, or actually shortly, I will be getting a couple of shipments of big media mail boxes of Harvard University Press's Itati Library, every volume that they've ever done. which are all works of the Renaissance, with the original language on one side and an English language translation on the other, and new introductions. Lots and lots of Itati volumes are first time appearances in English of the work. Uh, I think it's likely that I'm going to be getting that library. I don't know what I'm going to do with it. I don't think I'm going to keep it. It's a magnificent gift, but like so many bookish gifts that I get, it flies against my stated wishes. I've learned over my 28 years that that's a very popular way for people to give presents, is kind of spitefully. I know you don't want this. That's why I'm giving it to you. Like it's now I'm forcing you to keep it. I'm kind of forcing my will on you. That absolutely does not work on me. That is not the way that gifts work. If somebody gives me something, I don't care how rare it is or how expensive it is, how valuable it is, I'm going to dump it out the back door the next chance I get unless I want it. I'm not going to keep it just because you gave it to me. And the source of these Itati volumes is a magnificent gift, if it happens. But the source of these gifts knew perfectly well that I was getting them one by one in the mail from Harvard University Press, and that I wasn't keeping them. We agreed, he and I, that it's a magnificent thing in the publishing world. Okay, great. There are plenty of magnificent things in the publishing world. I don't have 3 bookcases of New York Review of Books classics. That's a magnificent thing in the publishing world. I don't have 3 bookcases of Loeb classical library editions. That's a magnificent thing in the publishing world. But the thought of it, the thought that that might happen, and there will, if that does happen, there'll be a lot of those Itati volumes that I will want to revisit. Because most people, most general readers, when pressed to name a work of the Italian Renaissance, can name maybe one, maybe The Prince by Machiavelli, but nothing else of this explosion of literary learning and writing. So I thought that before that, preparatory to that, whether that gift ever arrives or not, I thought that I would do some preparatory reading about the Renaissance. I have a whole bunch of histories along those lines, whole bunch of one-volume histories, whole bunch of specialty histories, especially about Renaissance Venice. But then at the last minute, I remembered this. National Geographic did this big volume on the Renaissance, which is, beautifully illustrated all throughout. It has articles on individual people, articles, of course, the prerequisite article on Leonardo da Vinci, but also on the Medici and art and commerce and war. And these big National Geographic volumes are so great. They're just so great. They're not in depth at all, but they're wonderful. So this one would definitely count as, there's the whole lot of them there. I have most of these things. This one would definitely count as a am reading, because I didn't feel, I've gone through this a million times in the, 70 years since it first appeared. Do I even want to know? I don't even know. 1970. Yeah, 70 years. See, the consultants on this include Paul Murray Kendall, whose book on Richard III I just recently read, and also Roland Bainton, whose biography of Martin Luther is incredible, and also Vincent Cronin, who wrote 2 general interest books about the Renaissance that are on my list to read. So not a fly-by-night editorial concern, but I have read this volume so many times that I'm just sort of picking and choosing around it. So it counts as a kind of currently reading. Just last week at the Brattle, I found the holy grail of the so-called Shakespeare authorship controversy. All of you who've watched this channel for any length of time will know that I love playing with the Shakespeare authorship controversy. The idea that William Shakespeare from Stratford-on-Avon did not write the plays that we have under his name. I love digging into that whole subject, and I have a whole shelf of books on the subject, including Is Shakespeare Dead by Mark Twain. But for a long, long time, the one book I didn't have on the subject is the one that really kicked it off for the modern day. And I found a copy at the Brattle last week in hardcover with a dust jacket and signed. This is Shakespeare Identified by J. Thomas Loney, whose name Stratfordians, people who are absolutely complacently sure, I might add, without as much evidence as they think they have, that the man from Stratford did write the plays, love calling this guy loony. They love pronouncing his name that way. It wouldn't matter, I want to stress, whether or not you pronounce it that way. It's just a name. An author debunking by any other name would still smell as credible. And J. Thomas Loney, 100 years ago, more, wrote this book not only tearing apart the Shakespeare legend, which half of this book is concerned with doing, not only pointing out all the problems with the Shakespeare legend, with the standard biography that you will get in books by anybody, Peter Ackroyd, Ross King, and the Shakespeare Birthplace Trust. That biography says that Shakespeare was born to roughly the lower middle class, to a glove maker's son, was educated at the local grammar school, which you shouldn't confuse with our present-day grammar school. It was extensive training in Latin and Greek, lots of memory work, lots of penmanship. Spent some wild years, married a woman older than him and had children with her, then decamped to London to hold horses at the theater door, eventually take on some acting, write a couple of poems dedicated to the Earl of Southampton, and then achieve fame and success as the greatest playwright of his age, before retiring from that life and moving back to Stratford-on-Avon, buying the second biggest house in town and living there in quietude, loaning and collecting small sums of money, taking people to court, hoarding grain during a famine, and then eventually dying with no notice anywhere in the London press that the prince of all our letters, the god of all our idolatries, has just died. No notice like we got with Ben Jonson, no notice like we got with Spencer, anything like that. J. Thomas Loney looks at that, at the beginning of this book, he looks at that story and points out how little factual basis there is for any of it. There's no record that Shakespeare of Stratford-on-Avon ever went to school. There's no record that he ever wrote a letter. There's no record that he ever knew how to write. There's a record that someone had an acting career in London. Is it the same person? And if it is the same person, did that person then go on to write? So this person who we have no letters for, no trail, no paper trail of any kind, no evidence that he was ever schooled, much less schooled extensively, the kind of schooling you would have to get at a university, not at a grammar school in Stratford. So this person, where we have no evidence that anything like that ever happened, the first thing he writes is Venus and Adonis, an incredibly polished and accomplished play, or a poem, a long poem, thousands of lines. That's the first thing that he writes. The sonnets, if you want to argue that he wrote those before and didn't publish them, those are the first things he wrote. There's no trail earlier than that, no earlier work. Looney goes through that whole, he goes through that, all the stuff that I've talked about on this channel many, many times before. He adds a whole bunch of things that I'd forgotten. The only time I read this book was a long, long time ago out of a library. Now I have a copy, so I can really go over it. And a couple of other details that he makes sure to stress that I'd forgotten that he stressed. Of course, one is that in addition to learning, which ought to end the conversation right there, we also have no evidence whatsoever that William Shakespeare of Stratford-on-Avon ever left the country. And the author of the plays certainly did. So, you might, Stratfordians, or people who are just complacent on the subject, will say, well, we don't have much of this kind of information for anybody. That's not true. It's absolutely not true. And even if it were true, we're not making the same claims for everybody else that we're making for Shakespeare. For Shakespeare, we're saying this is the greatest author of the human race. So if the claims are greater, maybe, not only are the claims greater, but also an absolute army of people have poured through every parish register, every deed office, everywhere, in London and in every town, everywhere in the entire country of England, in order to find the tiniest scrap of written proof that this guy existed and what he was doing from year to year. And the number of things that have cropped up that are in any way dispositive to a life in letters is precisely zero. Well, that kind of search has never been done for Fletcher or Marlowe. Who knows what it would turn up if it did? I doubt very much that it would turn up nothing. But in addition to that, Loney also points out a couple of other things, stresses a couple of other things in the first part of this book, which is, for instance, that we have no idea how Shakespeare made his money. I said in the standard biography is that he became a success on the London stage and London playwriting, and then retired to Stratford-on-Avon and bought property. And the inference there that the Shakespeare birthplace trust is perfectly happy to lay on you is that the one afforded the other. But that absolutely is not true. No one you could be any kind of success on the stage in London. You would never be able to afford what Shakespeare could afford. So where did that money come from? Well, again, you don't know, and neither do I. There are no records. But if you were to extrapolate, you would say, well, surely it came from, we know that he was a businessman, both before he left for London and a career in the theater, and after he left London. So presumably it came from that, from being a really successful businessman. So now, in addition to saying that the greatest writer in the history of the human race did so without any documented education or travel, without any documented access to any of the manuscripts that he would have to have had to write his plays in an age with no libraries, now you're saying that in addition to all of that, that he was able to create the miracle of the collected Shakespeare without any proof of any of those things. Now, on top of all that, you're saying he did it in his spare time between bouts being Gordon Gekko. J. Thomas Loney goes at that for a great deal. He's a stiff writer, a little bit of a bloated writer. There is a kind of eloquence, especially when he turns an elephantine joke. But then, of course, he does what everybody who deals with the Shakespeare authorship controversy, he does what they all do, and what they shouldn't do. He steps further out on the branch than I can follow him by then identifying, well, if the man from Stratford didn't write the plays, which I don't think there's any argument to be made that he could not possibly have done it, or that if you're going to say he did it, you're going to say he did it on a completely different evidentiary basis than you use for literally anything else. You might not admit that, but if you're going to say it, especially if you're going to say it complacently, of course he did. It's right there on the book on my shelf. If you're going to be complacent about it, then at least you have to stay quiet when I say that with this one subject, you are completely changing the rules of evidence. With this one subject, you're saying William Shakespeare from Stratford-on-Avon was the author of the plays of William Shakespeare, and so I will go back and fill that in. That is not how you're supposed to do it. That's not how you do it with anybody else. So if you're going to be complacent about the subject, you at least have to admit that. But if you're just going to say that Shakespeare of Stratford-on-Avon couldn't have written these plays, well, fine. But they never do. They always go farther than that. And J. Thomas Loney, of course, famously goes on to say that the author is the 17th Earl of Oxford, the man on the cover here, that the Earl of Oxford wrote the plays of Shakespeare, and that when the dating of the plays seems to be wrong, it's because we're dating the plays wrong. That when the lack of evidence seems to hurt Oxford as much as it does Shakespeare, because we don't have any, we have a tiny, tiny, tiny scrap of the writings of the Earl of Oxford, and to put it mildly, they don't show Shakespearean talent. So if you're going to say that, then you have to come up with a whole bunch of reasons why not. It doesn't really hang together, but I think that you are in a stronger position to name a candidate and say the reasons why the evidence is wrong than to name a candidate and say the lack of evidence doesn't matter. But either way, it was a joy to finally have Shakespeare identified, to finally be able to put first of all, I reread it, and then to put it on my shelf of Shakespeare rabble-rousing books. That was great, great fun. And I had a couple of other finds last week as well. That also, I meant to dip into them. I was just going to dip into this, but I ended up reading the whole thing. A couple of these others, I meant just to dip into them and then just read them from front to back, and I'm glad that I did. They were really, really wonderful to revisit. Two old biographies that I just love and that I've had in one form or another. One is Catherine Drinker Bowen. This is her book Yankee from Olympus, which is her biography of Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr., Justice Holmes. And this is a battered old hardcover. I have had this, the most often that I've had this was as a mass market paperback, but the last mass market paperback that I had of this fell to pieces a long time ago, and I have never bothered to replace it. I say I've never bothered to replace it. I've also never seen it again, because older mass market paperbacks are rarer and rarer to find, no matter what they are. But this is just terrific. This author is just so good, just so good. And I thought that I would just dip in. Actually, any of you who've watched this channel for any long length of time will know exactly what part of this book I intended to reread and leave the other parts for a rainy day. And you would be right. That part was the overlap between Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr., ancient Brahmin Boston, and William Howard Taft. Because after Taft was president, he became Chief Justice of the Supreme Court and was a colleague of Holmes. And they didn't see eye to eye on a lot. And I originally thought that I would just dip in and read that section of it, but I read the whole thing. I reread the whole thing and loved it. And now I don't have to worry. This hardcover is not, it's not in great condition, and it's also not much to look at. It's just a green cover. But it's a lot more durable than a mass market paperback, and I've never seen it otherwise. I don't see it that often. And the other of those old biographies, old classic biographies that I've read these things so many times. I know them really well. I just love them anyway. A lot of you who maybe don't read nonfiction will be baffled at the idea that someone could love reading a biography, probably because you're mistakenly thinking that it's just a checklist of what happened in the person's life. And even those of you who might grant that you could read a biography and enjoy it would probably balk at the idea of rereading a biography, and yet I don't consider it is. Biography is a viable form of writing. It's a form of writing on its own. It can be done with artistry or not. So I don't see anything stranger about rereading a biography than rereading a novel. So I reread Yankee from Olympus. It'd been way too long in that regard. This next one, I've reread comparatively recently because I keep finding it in different formats. And the different formats never really work out. I have an example to show you what I mean. The book is Samuel Eliot Morrison's biography of John Paul Jones. I found this hardcover. Somebody put a plastic covering on it. Too late to save it from that, I think. But this is terrific. Everything that Samuel Eliot Morrison wrote is terrific. And I have had this in a few different formats. On this channel, years and years ago, 6 or 7 years ago probably, I found Literary Society, Book Society hardcover in a slipcase of this, and I was over the moon about it. It was so solid, so well made, the cloth bookmark and everything. But as Mark Richardson could tell you, I have a vexed history with boxes, with the box of a slipcase. I'm pretty rough on my stuff. And I just don't pay that close attention. And so my box sets, I tend to get them because I love the aesthetic, and then I tend never to open them because I'm afraid I tend never to slip anything out of them because I'm afraid I won't be able to get it back in. And that was true of that John Paul Jones book. I put it on the shelf and just was afraid to go near it. And once I realized I was afraid to go near it, I got rid of it. I sold it back to the Brattle. And the other form of this book that I've had is this. These old Time Life books that have the tough cardboard cover and really stiff binding. They all have this kind of blockish 1960s cover design. Time did a whole bunch of these, a whole bookcase full of books like this. And every once in a while, out of nostalgia, I will get one. I got this out of nostalgia. When did I get this? Years ago. Yeah. But these aren't readable. I don't know why I keep doing it. They're not readable. Time Inc. did a version of these books with where the cover was not this tough cardboard. Instead, the cover was kind of a textured floppy design, and the binding was different. I have, for instance, their USA trilogy by John Dos Passos in that way, but not this. This has gone on the shelf. When I got this, I read one battle, and then I put it on the shelf. And when I read the battle, I was reading it like this. I was reading it terrified. And when I saw this, there he is. There's himself. When I saw this, I suddenly realized, that this was preying on my mind. So this is going bye-bye. This is just an ordinary hardcover. It's not a hardcover with a slipcase. It's not a weirdly delicate trade paperback. It's just a hardcover, and that's that. So this and this, two great old biographies that I will not need to worry about anymore. I won't need to worry about pounding on them anymore. So there's that. Should we stick with biography? Yeah, let's stick with biography for just a bit. Like I mentioned yesterday, I reread this, Graven with Diamonds, Nicholas Schulman's biography of Thomas Wyatt. This is the paperback. It does not have deckled edges. I was wrong about that, but it does have French flaps. It was a paperback original. And I had Wyatt on the mind. I love Thomas Wyatt's poetry. I've written about it quite a bit. But I've had him on the mind because he is hovering around the edges and occasionally walking on stage in The Mirror and the Light by Hilary Mantel, which I just recently reread for the umpteenth time. I wasn't rereading it looking for Wyatt, but as I've mentioned a couple of times when I talk about those books, Mantel has a weird soft spot for Wyatt. At first I thought that was just a writerly affectation and that she was imitating the weird soft spot that Cromwell himself had for Wyatt, which is documented. But no, she seems to have a weird soft spot for him on her own. And especially for his poetry. So you can't read that book and not notice it, especially since tradition has it that Wyatt was at the scaffold when Cromwell was beheaded. Not a tradition that Mantel subscribes to, but still a tradition. So I reread this thing. I found it at the Brattle just last week, and I've had it from time to time. Boy, oh boy, though, was this better than I remembered. Just a terrific book. Just terrific. So that's a biography, and also there's this biography, which I think I missed this. I think I just plain missed this when it came out. This was published by Wiley Blackwell. It's possible that this never had a U.S. publisher. When did you come out? 2009. So I was well and truly back in the review game. I think I would have noticed this. Maybe not. This time of year, I could easily be fuzzy on things like that. But I found a biography of Lady Jane Grey by Eric Ives. I want to check and see. I haven't yet, but I want to check and see if this thing ever actually did have an American publication. I don't know that it did, but I loved it. Eric Ives, of course, is the author of the greatest Anne Boleyn biography of them all, I think. I recently reread that. I reread that this year and loved it. Just loved it. Loved how brutal it is, how steeply eloquent it is. And this is the same way. Same gifts, same author, very much same kind of insights, same grappling with the sources. I'm not just going to repeat what I find in the archives. I'm going to subject it to a rather, wrestling move analysis. You have to make sense, or I'm not just going to repeat you. I'm going to repeat you and discredit you. And there's a lot about that to do with Jane Grey. I thought this was fantastic. Didn't think that I could read a Jane Grey biography that I liked. I got one earlier this year, uh, about the Gray sisters. I found that when I was out book shopping with David Murphy, and it was okay. It was kind of flat. It's what you can do if you're writing a book about Lady Jane Grey. You can write a book like the one that I read, the Grey Sisters or Sisters or whatever it was called. You can write a book like that, and it'll do just fine. It'll get reviewed by the historical society journals. It'll get reviewed in History Magazine, and if some reviewer in London has a guy in his Rolodex that likes to write up Tudor stuff, you can probably send it to him and see one way or another what he'll do. And that's it. It won't be anything amazing. It will be kind of boring to read. It won't try anything new. It won't subject any sources to any kind of rigorous analysis, Sherlock Holmes style analysis. You can write a book like that on a subject like Jane Grey, who, is subject of a movie. She's got it's a very interesting story. The typical story is that she was thrust onto the English throne, stayed there for just a little while, and then was eventually beheaded by Queen Mary against Queen Mary's will. The story just gets more and more hallmarky that Queen Mary didn't want to execute her and was forced to do so because her prospective husband didn't want a rival claimant alive in the kingdom. The raw bones of that story are fascinating anyway. So you could basically phone in a book on Lady Jane Grey and get away with it. And Ives doesn't. This is just incredible. Just incredible. It's a keeper, definitely. A lot of these things are keepers. But I think that does it for biography. I read this, the Vineyard Gazette Reader. This is the second Vineyard Gazette Reader, a collection of pieces from the Martha's Vineyard Gazette, a newspaper off the coast of from Martha's Vineyard off the coast of Massachusetts. This is creeping a lot closer to my own time writing for the Gazette, so it was fascinating. With any collection like this, you're going to have ups and downs. This had ups and downs. Unfortunately, this second collection, this second reader, had more downs than ups, I think. I don't know what explains that, whether it's just that it was a bad time period or maybe bad editing of this volume. I remember very much more enjoying the first Vineyard Gazette Reader, the earlier one to this one. Yeah, I'm not going to stop. But I was happy to find this, and I was happy for the good spots that it gave me. Then I found a copy of a book that I've owned many, many times. I've had it on this channel a few times. And there's an etiology to it. Where do we go here? I want to sort of take you through the labyrinth here. I reread this, in which a very serious man makes a serious inquiry into whether or not William Shakespeare of Stratford-on-Avon, the businessman, could have written the plays of William Shakespeare. And when I was done with this, I naturally dipped a toe into The Mysterious William Shakespeare by Charlton Ogburn, which we've seen on this channel before. I naturally dipped a toe into that. Now, it's a massive thing, so I didn't reread the whole of that. But I dipped a toe into Ogburn talking about Shakespeare's working life as an actor and a theater manager. I specifically reread that part of it because that part of this really stuck out to me, where Aloni makes it clear that A, we don't know that any of that is true, and B, even if it is true, it certainly wasn't the source of Shakespeare's income. It certainly wasn't the source of his wealth. It could not account for him buying a house in Stratford. So I wanted to go back to Ogburn for that, and I read that. I read a little bit more than that, but I didn't reread the whole book. But last week at the Brattle, I also found this, The Winter Beach, by Charlton Ogburn, in which he writes, this is an illustrated book. I think every chapter, there are little illustrations throughout. He goes up and down the eastern seacoast and writes very poetically, very beautifully about what beach environments, the beach ecosystem, beach communities are like in the winter. I've read this a million times. I've had it mostly in trade paperback. I found this hardcover that I will just keep. I'll just put this in the little book room. And I reread this and loved it. Just loved it. This is such a good writer. I feel it's almost a little a shame that so much of his best writing was expended in The Mysterious William Shakespeare, a book that people, readers, who very much want good reading, good prose, are just going to dismiss. They're not ever going to read his best writing because of the subject matter. But they might read this. This was okay. Doesn't look very happy in that picture. He isn't any happier. He wasn't any happier when he started getting into Shakespeare authorship controversy. Let's see here. What else do we have here? Okay, religious. Well, actually, no. We'll save the religious stuff for last. We'll go next to my secular religion, which is the American publishing industry. I found this thing from Indiana University Press. This is Donald Sheehan's book. This was publishing. I found this at the Brattle last week. This is a history of American publishing in the Gilded Age, basically. I mean, mostly in the Gilded Age. What it was like, who paid for it, how much money it made, how many people it employed, what we can know about it. A valuable book, a little bit drier than I would have liked. You could write a great book on this subject. I've read better books on this subject, although not this time period. But still, tons and tons of details that I plucked out of it that I really enjoyed. And this is a sweet spot for me anyway, reading about this subject. So, and it wasn't a long book. Then this next one was a reread, a classic. Boy, I'm really. Two or three, actually three of the classics that I'm showing you here all have a lot in common. They all had lunch in the same place. The place name was Lockover. This is Perry Miller's book, Errand into the Wilderness, which some of you preacher kids will know. This is a trade paperback. I've had this in hardcover. I've had this in many, many trade paperbacks. I don't ever manage to hold on to it, and I don't know why that is. I send it out to people. That's the reason that I don't hold on to it, and I love sending books out to people. So that's the broader reason. But still, I ought to hold on to a copy of this because it's terrific. It's all about evangelical outreach, let's just call it, in the colonies, in the American colonies. It reminds the reader and brings front stage the fact that that the errand into the wilderness, that exhortation, conversion, going out on conversion journeys to the heathen, was a huge part of the founding of this country. A huge part of, maybe not the founding, but a huge part of the colonization of the eastern seacoast was people doing that, and doing it for that reason, building towns and townships and whatnot, and then going out, being brutally murdered, lying their faces off, brutally murdering others. Perry Miller he's drier than Catherine Drinker Bowen as a writer, and he's drier than Samuel Eliot Morison as a writer, but still commanding, just amazingly. I never read this book without getting whole new things out of it, a whole bunch of new things out of it. And there was one particular character in here. He was a Moses to the heathen. I walk my dog past his grave pretty much once a week here in my neighborhood of Boston, and I originally thought that I would go into this just looking up Eliot and reading him, just reading what Miller has to say about him, but I ended up reading a whole book. Anyway, so there's a lot of that in this Friday Reads. And then finally there's this thing, The Presence of Grace, where someone collects the Catholic literature book reviews of the great writer Flannery O'Connor. Not a long thing at all. And the reviews aren't long. I want to show you that. See? Just like that. Most of them are just like that. Dozens and dozens of them. Flannery O'Connor herself, in a couple of places in this book, mentions that they aren't really reviews. They're more like notices. They're just about 200 or 300 words. She views them as like church notices. She views them as like church mice, lean and poor and skinny. She gets a lot done in those. And this is not the only book like this that I've encountered. For instance, the collected prose of Marianne Moore the great poet, Marianne Moore. Marianne Moore did a huge amount of book reviewing in her life, in addition to writing poetry and cheering on the Red Sox. She did a huge amount of book reviewing. If you know that she's living, at the Hotel Vendôme and you're a book publisher in Boston, you'd be crazy not to send her a package of books. What if she decides to review one of them? She's a celebrity. Of course you're going to send her a package of books. And she did a lot of that. As I pointed out, once you get that taste in you, to say nothing of the extra $50, you really never quite quit it. I mean to talk about it at length because I don't know that a surface discussion does it justice, but there is a particular satisfaction to that exchange that never goes away, even when you no longer need the $50. That the satisfaction of that immediate quid pro quo. I'm going to do this for you. I'm going to do it better than the 10 people who could do it for you as well. And in exchange, you're going to give me money. I'm making it sound horrible. But it is wonderful. It's a wonderful habit-forming thing. It's one of the reasons why I have made my revived literary blog, Steve Reads, for pay. And a number of you have been done me the incredible honor of paying for that. But Marianne Moore wrote book reviews she did them for the $50, but and also to scratch that urge that you're getting ready money for your writing. But she would often write a review of a book in 100 words. And there's a volume, the collected prose of Marianne Moore, that has hundreds of those. And it's amazing what she can do in 100 words. I had an editor once who told me when I chafed against 800 words, that editor said to me, well, it seems to me that if you can't say what you want to say in 800 words, then either you couldn't say it in 4,000 words, or it isn't worth saying. Now, she said that in the nicest way possible. I bridled at it just a little because, well, what writer wouldn't bridle at that just a little? I came to see the sense of it. And yet to see the exceptions. I have a few friends who are living today where if they get a chance to write 4,000 words for the New York Review of Books, I want to read every one of those words. I don't want it to be any shorter. But it's often just the way of it. It's often just hardwired in. Your editor doesn't have 4,000 word space to give you anyway. So, and that is what Flannery O'Connor is dealing with in this book, over and over again, year by year. So and so wants 200 words. I can do 200 words. So and so wants 300 words. I can do 300 words. And like I talked about this yesterday, I think, or the day before, and I worried then, or I mentioned then, that unlike with most collected book reviews, where I'm pretty much in the conversation, with these are all specialty Catholic publications, great deal of them are, and I'm going to read these book reviews without knowing anything about the book under review. I won't have read it myself. I certainly won't have reviewed it myself. And that turned out to be true. And the main reason why I wasn't worrying about that is because Flannery O'Connor is a great writer. Even when she's downplaying what she's doing, she often says, well, these are really just notices. They're not book reviews. I might be able to get off one or two good bits. She gets off a lot more than one or two good bits when she can. Some of the things that are included in here are simply book notices, where Flannery O'Connor is simply summarizing the contents of a book at 150 words, 200 words, which is weird. That's absolutely weird. That's like being a grade school teacher and assigning your children a 2-paragraph assignment, what is an atom? And one of your students takes it home and asks her grandfather to help him with it, and her grandfather's Einstein. That seems like the quintessential swatting a fly with a nuclear bomb to have Flannery O'Connor write a book report. Nevertheless, a great deal of the things in here are book reviews, no matter how short they are. And by far the best thing in here. I didn't expect that I didn't know that it was going to be in here. By far the best thing in this book is that interspersed with these book notices and short book reviews are correspondence of Flannery O'Connor letters to her editors or her friends about reviewing. Oh my God, that ended up being so much my favorite part of this book. I know that she would bridle at that. I should be looking at her written words, not her private stuff. But in those italicized letters interspersed between the reviews, I saw the life. I saw the life that I have lived. For a long time I lived it, and then I stopped for 25 years, and then for the last 20 years I've been living it again. I saw that life. Where if you're writing to a friend, you're complaining about your editor. If you're writing about your editor, you're complaining about the book. Where I never got this. Did you send it to me? You don't want to extend the deadline even though you didn't send it to me on time? Or, you sent me this. It's not my dish of tea at all, as Flannery O'Connor puts it. There's no way that I can do anything here with this. Can you send me, for instance, something else? I saw something else. Maybe you have that you could send in its place. The letters range all over the spectrum of what it's like to be a working book reviewer. At one end of that spectrum, you are a name on a ledger. Your editor doesn't know you from a hole in the wall, and you have no right to ask for any special treatment at all. You have every reason not to, because you'll get booted. And then there's the other end of the spectrum where you kind of sort of know your editor, or your editor knows you, or both. And it's really, your editor doesn't want to force you to write about anything. They want you to want to write about what they send you. And everywhere in between. Oh my God. I'm sure there weren't enough of those letters. That most of them are a paragraph long. I'm sure there weren't enough of them to make into a volume on their own. And maybe I want the book reviews too, especially since they're not prohibitively long. This wasn't a long reading experience at all, but I am going to go back to this. Many times I'm going to go back to this. And those little italicized letters in between the book reviews did more for me to understand the nature of Flannery O'Connor as a biography than the last two biographies of her that I read. The biographies are always so much investing in the Gothic crap and the peacocks and the leg braces and the horn-rimmed glasses and coffee for breakfast, all the stuff that goes along with it. They're so heavily investing in that when you get to the end of Brad Gooch's biography of this person, or anybody's biography of this person, you think she couldn't walk down the street. That she was so eccentric she couldn't order a soda pop. So reading those letter excerpts, those bits and pieces where she's saying, "Oh, yeah, I don't know that I have the time," or there was a snowstorm, I couldn't reach the mailbox," or "this book doesn't really do it," or "you said you'd send this and you didn't." Those were great. Those were. Oh baby, I've covered your landing spot with books. Oh, sorry about that. Do you want it all open, or do you just want a little bit of space? You want it all open, don't you? All right, here, let me get this all out of the way. Okay. There. Is that good? Yes, there you go. There you go. We are getting free to yoga. Are you going to hop over there? Yes, you are. Anyway, that's all I have to say there, is that that was a joy. This book was an absolute joy. I found it without expecting it at all. Didn't know it was out there, and it was a joy. So there you go. That is a long video, an hour-long video. That is my a Friday reads of some of the stuff that I've been reading this week in analog. So maybe I'll do a follow-up on the electronic version, but there's a lot, and it was wonderful. It was strange. December Friday reads, December reading, December nightstand is always a little strange for me anyway, because I'm starting to leave behind my usual remit. I'm starting to leave behind new releases. But if the reading experiences are great, that's fine by me. So I'm going to wrap this up at 50 minutes. Sorry for the length. These Friday reads videos go long, but feel free to tell me what you're reading this weekend. I would love to hear it. But anyway, I'm going to wrap this up. But I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.